please welcome the Director for Future Networks at the European Commission, Pearse O'Donoghue.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. First of all, thank Nesta and, of course, the City of Amsterdam for hosting the event, and also thanks to those very stimulating lightning talks that we've just heard, which really set the scene for the issues that we want to deal with here today. It's good that this, although virtual conference, is based in the Netherlands, because the Dutch tech community is one of the most active and enthusiastic for the NGI initiative, and I really welcome that. Today, the NGI Policy Summit brings virtually vibrant communities of tech innovators and policymakers from all over Europe. So that's why it's so important for us, the European Commission, to be part of this process. And rather than telling you the way things are going to be, my message is that we are aware of the issues, some of which have just been mentioned, and we really rely on you to help to provide us with some of the answers. So that's the point of this forum. The community and the various groups gathered together in the NGI policy framework, they provide us with a place where different perspectives and competences, both policy but particularly technology development, including a very strong element of civil society as well as industry, meet and come together to deliver on the vision of what we like to refer to as the human-centric and sustainable internet. Again, issues which were touched on in the lightning talks. And the work that we do needs to respond to some of the views and concerns that we heard earlier in the Vox Pop, in the street interviews that were featured as part of the introduction after the keynote speeches. So I'd like to talk about a few things, but Katja already referred to an extra element. That's the COVID-19 crisis. And that's adding to the challenges that we're facing and that the internet is facing. It's had and is having huge impacts on our society, on economy, on our way of life. And unfortunately, far from being over, we'll have to deal with the consequences and the repercussions of COVID in the coming months and years. But we also need, therefore, to think positively about how we can transform the challenges into opportunities. And maybe some of the things that are happening, given the huge exposure that many more people have had to the internet as part of their daily lives, could be a way of actually pushing forward in delivering the human-centric internet that we all share a vision about. So it's a great time to reevaluate and rethink our approach to the internet, to accelerate our work on understanding human interactions, as you have referred to, and ensuring that the individual is at the center of these evolutions. Because the crisis shows just how dependent our society and our economy is on digital technologies and infrastructures. And it also shows the central role that it's playing in our lives for work, for teleworking, smart working, for homeschooling, remote healthcare, and just simply for interpersonal communication, which is very important at a time when people are cut off physically from one another. So not only has it played that role, but it convinced us that we need to take a much more proactive role with you, the internet and developer community, in ensuring that digital technologies will be one of the pillars in which we collectively build the recovery. Now, that involves a significant element of solidarity. If we look at recovery, but also transition, the EU has provided a lot of rapid reactions in order to deal with some of the fallout from the crisis, including distribution of resources. Because at the highest peak of its crisis, member states were showing, to a certain extent, a high level of cooperation and solidarity. But in some cases, the Commission had to intervene, for example, in the closing of borders, in order to actually force member states and communities to think about how we needed to work together in order to overcome the crisis. The same will be the case for recovery measures. The Commission has already announced a recovery plan of 750 billion euros. That's called Next Generation EU, which is focusing on the twin transition, the green and the digital transitions, which will support the economy as a whole, because we know that it is not going to be business as usual. And while as that is very disruptive for many people it has created unemployment and great economic uncertainty. That not going back to business in Europe is also, again, something which we can transform positively by making sure that what does push growth in the European economy and recovery is both green and also is very much more exploiting, harnessing the digital transitions. It's very important to note that 20% of the recovery funds, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, will be devoted to projects in the digital area. There will be significant government involvement in determining the programming of that money, and therefore there is an opportunity to ensure that there is a very significant societal element to everything that is done. So the topics that we're discussing today at the summit are very important: connectivity, data, artificial intelligence, secure European e-identity, and of course digital inclusion. Those are all many of the priorities for the Digital Recovery and Resilience Facility, and again where this NGI community can play a role. And in that, how will we actually, in a practical and pragmatic way, actually increase and focus on the role of human-centric technologies, the human-centric implementation of technology and its governance in this digital transition? That is a very challenging question, and again, one I hope that you will contribute to today. Because with industrial data, core infrastructures, and questions such as leadership in technology development, they're all essential to the technology strategy as well. But of course, they have, as some of our speakers have already said, tended to focus on the market and how the private sector will provide responses. But Europe, in seeking to assert its digital sovereignty in a positive and affirmative way, will need also to ensure that issues such as data protection, protection of the individual, and greater user control of their social and work environment are actually core to anything that we finance and support. And also, of course, in the setting of standards, which will be the technology standards by which the private sector will have to operate. So it's focusing on our key values and principles, such as I've said, the right to privacy, but also freedom of speech, the free flow of data, and cybersecurity. That way, if we get it right, technology can serve human needs and avoid the phenomenon of the human being part of the process, being part of the consumables, and instead being the controller of her or his internet identity and participation in that community. Now, as the internet expands, we have to ensure that it is safer. And even from a very hardcore business point of view, in the work that we're doing with industry on the industrial data spaces, for example, they too realize that the internet depends, take-up of the internet depends, and therefore their future business models depend on safer, more secure data and the respect of individuals. If nobody will agree or accept to interface with a technology as it evolves, that will be critically damaging to that technology and therefore to Europe's competitive future. So it's in everyone's interest, including the industrial sector, including business, to participate in this initiative. And many companies are doing so. And that is why the NGI initiative brings together these communities together, including, of course, the community of innovators, working on research and innovation, which we will continue to fund. And they have already started providing the building blocks for this human-centric internet. In the first 18 months of operation, we've had thousands of startups and open source developers applying for our calls. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to provide funding for everybody, but more than 500 innovators have been able to develop technologies in key areas, like privacy-enhancing technologies, for example, or decentralized data governance, and those are very important. A very good example of the relevance of NGI in this context is that at the peak of the COVID crisis, the NGI community was able to respond rapidly and show its own adaptability and resilience in mobilizing itself to contribute to some of the tech solutions. Because while the pandemic was still spreading, a number of applications and softwares were designed to help us fight it. In early April, the Commission published guidelines on the development of so-called tracing apps to help fight the spread of COVID. And in promptly establishing at our suggestion, the Emergency Tech Review Facility, which was working on the tracing apps, the NGI community directly supported the Commission and the Member States in the development of that COVID-19, that trustworthy technology dealing with COVID-19, and gave us independent and impartial security and privacy analysis about whether the apps and the APIs that supported them on the most common operating systems were fit for purpose and met European values, particularly, of course, of data protection, as well as more general data security. That tech review facility also allows different solutions and means that there are different technologies being offered, which can be compared in terms of their design, etc., and effectiveness, which also means that this is another way of providing choice, as it were. Now, to focus on what is actually our key element in the NGI, which is that of creating the Internet of Trust, one where the individual can trust that they are in a safe environment. Of course, we have always led by the entrepreneurial approach of try and fail or succeed, and that has supported Internet developments. That will continue, but as we've heard from some of the speakers, we have to make sure that that is framed by and accompanied by a strong set of values which are actually implementable in a concrete way in relation to respect of the individual, personal data protection, but also allowing a community approach, an open source approach, where there is not necessarily a commercial or lucrative end, but which will actually have very direct benefits to society and therefore to the economy as well. So in the context of our new research program, which we're just rolling out in our 7-year cycle of funding, that will be an important element in the Internet of Trust, providing the technical and standards, this technical basis for a new, reliable digital environment built on more resilient but also sustainable and decentralized Internet architecture. An architecture that empowers end users with more control over their identity and their data, of course, but also does lead to greater space for these new social as well as business models that respect European values. So there are a couple of key issues there. Data governance is one, digital identity is another. At the heart of our approach, therefore, is that we have to govern the data, make sure that it is properly controlled, and that citizens are fully empowered to control their data. Just as small businesses need to be able to control their non-personal data as well, if they are able to survive and thrive in this new digital environment. So obviously, the GDPR, our data protection regulations, are at the core of any initiative that we take, but also the wider set of values representing the human. But they have to be translated into technical and organizational practices. And this is where you, the NGI community, are essential to the work that we want to do. It has to be easy for individuals to give and also to take back, to withdraw their consent, to change the way or the parameters that they've set on any given app or platform, and also to carry their data between providers in a meaningful and operational way for them, but in a way that they decide. So that's why really we have to look at these issues in the NGI context and provide funding so that this will be provided alongside those things where companies investing their own money have a commercial incentive to develop products hopefully useful for the citizen. But we must ensure that those that might not necessarily initially have a commercial angle are equally viable when it comes to their being offered to the citizen. For example, we have one experiment on decentralized data governance systems, which allows individuals to store their data. And there are many projects working in that regard. It works in areas like healthcare, mobility, culture, public services, and so on. And these are areas where we want to see even greater efforts made in the future. Another thing that we have to do in the NGI context is to harness technologies and make sure that they are working for the citizen. So blockchain or distributed ledger technologies, we all tend to know a little bit about them. There are only a few experts out there, I'm sure some of you are watching, who actually fully understand what the technology does, but also the risks that can be entailed. NGI is already dedicating significant investment on blockchain. with projects that's supporting innovators to move ahead on the technology itself, making it more efficient, particularly making it more sustainable from an energy consumption point of view, but also how to foster trust and make sure that the good elements of blockchain can be harnessed to work again for the citizen in terms of data protection and secure identity. Later today, by the way, we're going to be awarding prizes to the 6 winners of the prize for blockchains for social good, who are applying decentralized solutions to addressing those sustainability challenges. We're also doing a lot more. We're funding concrete tools to increase the privacy of end users, new ways to manage passwords, to encrypt emails, secure online collaboration, even to improve the operation of the Internet Traffic Protocol. So these are a lot of ambitious areas where we need the full community to be involved and where we want to give our support without telling you what the solutions will be, but telling you what we need to see as part of the framework in which those solutions are developed. The other element I mentioned was digital identity. That obviously is critical. And there are a number of commercial offerings out there with regard to identity, but the drawbacks have been well documented. What we see is that large online platforms are increasingly used to both be used, but also to prove identity and access other online services, including public services. And that has a number of drawbacks, which you are very familiar with. And we heard about that actually in the videos from the Vox Pop. There are also some long-term competition risks. Lack of proper verification can also be a problem, and the risk of cyber attack on an individual is quite high. So that means that we have a challenge, and we want to address that through the NGI. We're supporting the development of platform-independent, standardized EID technologies and services. You'll be hearing more from the Commission on that, but we need the technology to accompany it. And it has to be something that gives the end user full control. For example, we have one project which is calling Internet and Trust Service Innovators to develop technologies and standards for that trustworthy online identity, building on developments around blockchain and self-sovereign identity. All of that, as I said, in a context which the European Union will provide on the existing eIDAS framework, as well as the uptake of EID and trust, where the Commission will be making announcements later in the year. So there has to be a new way of doing policy. We're not going to go as far as some of the speakers, and it's a very legitimate view where we have to have a discussion, in completely replacing the commercial model on which much of the internet is based. But as you've heard from much of what I've said, we are very conscious of the drawbacks and real threats to personal privacy and data protection, as well as security, which the European Commission is mandated to stamp out with your help. We will have to do it with a community of willing, transparent and collaborative innovators, such as those that we are bringing together in the NGI community. It will also help us directly in our policy input and in the regulation for which we, the Commission, is responsible. That's why over a year ago we launched the NGI Policy Lab, which provides a platform for policymakers and other civil actors, as well as the innovators, to come together and to collaborate on these key digital and technology issues. So that is why we wanted this NGI Policy Summit. It's to be a key part of that dialogue. In fact, the discussion on how we can have innovative policy making and how we can test the technologies without there being massive commercial pressure or competition is really the role that NGI will play in the coming financial framework. We are running a series of pilots, but we want to expand that to look at new policy approaches to build a better internet. And really, that is something which I hope all of you will contribute to, because joint action can be a powerful mechanism to take and to tackle common challenges. So we will also be encouraging collaboration between local authorities. The work that is done in Amsterdam, for example, between the tech community, local government and central government, but also startup initiatives and incubators and so on, that is an integrated approach which puts the citizen at the center, small, innovative, eco-friendly companies as partners as well. So we will be looking at advanced municipalities like Amsterdam as best-in-class practices that we could help to replicate elsewhere. So to conclude, 4 years ago we launched the idea of an Internet of Humans. We didn't necessarily always express it in very clever branding terms, but a community of NGI innovators very quickly understood and showed us that they too had already been working very significantly on similar concepts. NGI seeks to bring those together, to have a comprehensive vision, putting the human and trust at the center of the internet by developing technologies that give end users more control of their data and the transactions that they conduct online. So 4 years later, that's gained momentum thanks to the community. Many stakeholders are calling for a restart of the internet. And we heard that again in the lightning talks, both in terms of technology, but also the business models, as well as the social impact. And that has made it very important for us to listen to you and to work with you. We're clear on what we want for the internet, for the citizen. And now what we are doing is working to implement that vision. We cannot, and we would not even try to do that on our own. The regulatory framework, the investment incentives cannot work without that third element, which is the community of innovators who represent the core values of Europe and the citizen. So this complements work we're doing in other areas. And of course, it should also guide the planning that we're doing now with regard to investment into such things as artificial investment or other core technologies. So here you are. We have developed and helped you to develop the community, but it's not a task for Commission or government. It has to be a joint endeavour. And with that collective vision of all of you who are listening in today, and thank you very much, we will actually be able to shape a better internet in the coming decade. So I really look forward to the discussions and workshops today. They will be a significant contribution to that work in a very practical way. And I hope that even though we're all online in a virtual setting, that we will really be able to share ideas and enrich our collective vision. Thank you very much for your time, and thank you for your participation.